I've used Bitwig for 2 years now, and before these 2 years I've used Cubase for basically everything. However, I haven't really used Cubase ever since I started using Bitwig. So I decided to just give it a try again and remind myself of what it is like to use Cubase, and maybe I will have some interesting insights about it then. So I don't know, let's get started. So as you can hear, I already started making a beat, so I'm not completely starting from scratch here. Something that sounds a bit like progressive trance, but it's kind of slower, so there is still something missing on the backbeat that would make this a little bit more exciting for this beat. But most importantly, and something that I always thought about so far, was the bassline. The bassline is pretty cool. It is being ducked by the kick. One problem that I always have with Cubase is that when you want something, when you want a sidechain input to influence a sound, then you also have to play back the other sound. For example, here I have the audio of the kick. It was a synthesizer before, but then I bounced it to a new track so that I can work better with it, because there was a filter involved that was not very consistent. And yeah, I'm sending the output from this kick to my kick sidechain group, because there is a huge high pass on it, so that all the compressors that pick up the information can work with the high pass signal, so that the compressor itself doesn't have to have a high pass in it every time, which is a workflow that is very similar to how I'm doing it in Bitwig. The only difference is here you have to use a group track, and in Bitwig you can just use any kind of track, because audio track, MIDI track, instrument track, group track, it's all the same in Bitwig, which does feel a little bit more comfortable, because I already found myself accidentally making audio tracks when I actually wanted to make group tracks here, and then I was like, why did I do that? But then I was also like, why do I even have to think about that? Okay, so if I wasn't playing the kick now, there wouldn't be any pumping. Just because I'm playing the kick, I hear pumping. Now, maybe it's different when I change the layout, because this is pre and post fader. So at the moment, I have, I think this is pre-fader, I'm not sure. Now post. Actually, what is it? Let's turn it down completely. Okay, so this is pre-fader definitely. And in Bitwig, when you have selected pre-fader, then you can basically mute the entire audio or turn it down completely, and it will still influence the thing that it should influence. And yeah, I once made a feature request for Bitwig that they implemented so that both pre-fader and post-fader have this property that they will still modulate the things that they are modulating, just don't output their sound when they are muted. But they like it to be only pre-fader. However, here in Cubase, it is neither pre-fader nor post-fader that the sound is coming through to the sidechaining, which is kind of a shame, actually. Yeah. So as you can see, I'm sort of reviewing the DAW a little bit from my new perspective. Now the next thing that I want to do is I'm just trying to compare what I would do if I was in Bitwig now, and then see how complicated that would be in Cubase, which is a reasonable position when you have used Bitwig all the time. So normally now I would make a layer on the bass and then try to come up with a cool alternative layer where the bass actually has reverb, and then one layer where it is just straight. So in Cubase you would have to do that by making 2 groups. Maybe I could use this folder track for that actually. Because I could, oh no, I cannot rename them. Why not? I mean, it automatically creates a folder, but I cannot rename the folder. Oh, I can, but I have to click up here. It's not quite clear why, but let's just say this is the bass group. Well, not entirely group, because groups and folders are different concepts here in Cubase. So this is bass dry, and this is bass reverb now. And yeah, I can just put it where the bass is. I could also put the bass itself in here. So one of the advantages of having folders and groups as a separate concept is you can put something into the folder and it will not automatically be routed in some way because of that. You can still just minimize the folder and everything is gone from your visibility. But the problem about it is that, well, it's basically the same argument, but seen from a different perspective, is that you would expect something that looks like this to be rooted in some way, because it's just a nice workflow to have it like that. Anyway, let's get started. So what I would do now is route this to bass dry, as well as with a send bass reverb post fader or pre fader actually, so that I can have individual gains there. Okay, that was pre fader, right? Let me check on the other thing. So this is post fader. Yeah, by the way, I should choose pre fader here as well, so that whatever I'm doing with the volume, the sidechaining is always the same. Okay. Okay, I think the bass dry thing might be a little bit redundant, or maybe not, because I do want separate FX chains. But as you can see, it's already getting a little bit confusing here, because you have to really think about your routing and how you set that up and stuff, and it's not a completely mindless process as it is in Bitwig, which is a bit of a shame. Anyway, let's get started. So I'm instantiating a reverb 100%. Let's go. Okay, now I have a reverb in here, and now what I would usually do is instantiating riff feedback light before and setting it to MIDI input, so that I can use the comp filter tuned to the same melody as the bassline to further harmonize the reverb send on 100%. However, in Cubase, the MIDI information from the synthesizer is not automatically passed on to the rest of the effect chain. So even if I was still on the same effect chain, it wouldn't work. It works even less by being on a completely different group. But well, you would think you can just go to the track and then use maybe something like a MIDI send or so. But MIDI sends are only available on MIDI tracks and not on instrument tracks for some reason. So you have to actually make a MIDI track. Oops, it's not a MIDI track. This is a MIDI track. And now you have two things that you could do. But I will do the thing where I copy the MIDI. You could also just use only one source and then route it to the bass track so that you only have one MIDI track. Or maybe I'm doing that. That will highlight a problem later, which can be very vital information for the Cubase developers especially. So now I am, oh, it's already routing to the other track if I see that correctly. Yeah, so for some reason that happened automatically, which is cool. Now I have a track that I can call bass MIDI, and this track is capable of sending its MIDI to some other place. So you already see a bit of a difference between Bitwig and Cubase. In Bitwig, at the place where you want to have MIDI or audio, you ask for that by instantiating a MIDI or audio receiver. Here it's the other way around. You are sending stuff somewhere else. And depending on your favorite workflow, you either find the receives or the sends better. I'm personally more of a fan of the receives, even though I've learned to use sends for most of my life. But it just makes more sense to me that I ask for the things where they are needed and not like the other way around. So wait, am I doing the right thing here? Riff feedback light. Now it's right. Okay, that's nice. That certainly makes the reverb sound a little bit bigger. Now the next thing that I want to do is compress the reverb. Okay, cool. Now here's a Cubase feature that I really love and that I would love to see in Bitwig, which is that when for some reason you get confused by whatever you muted or soloed in your track, it can happen really quickly if you actually minimize folders and stuff like that. Then you can just hit on the global MIDI or solo to undo everything, and you know that it will just be the thing now. That can have some really cool workflows, like muting everything. Oh, actually not. Okay, I kind of thought that when I'm hitting that from nothing being there, then it would mute everything or solo everything, but it can only disable that. Okay, then never mind. I thought I remembered that correctly, but I didn't. But yeah, they could make even more from this feature, I think. Okay, nice. So I must say these faders feel really nice. I cannot really say why, but the faders in Bitwig, they feel a little bit more fiddly. Maybe it's because you can make this really big. I don't know, but these faders, they just feel really good. You can always hold shift and drag them. I think the ones in Bitwig, if I recall it correctly, have some weird issue where sometimes it will not accept the shift modifier, while when you are using Cubase, you can always feel really sure that it will work, will always work using shift as a modifier, and it's really super sensitive. So I'm basically always have one hand on shift when I'm using Cubase because it's super effective. And I think that also helps with making very fine mixing decisions. So this DAW is definitely encouraging being very subtle about things. Let's also print some of the bassline into the pad, just because we can. So we instantiate another instance of riff feedback light, set it to MIDI, 100%, boom, 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 feedback, dial it in. Let's make this the default preset here. Right click. Why does it not work? Why can I not right click on set to default? That's kind of weird. Normally you can do that. Maybe I should find the setting here in the inspector, because when you're doing that, then sometimes you suddenly have the setting. Yeah. Okay, so there are certainly some workflow things in Cubase that just still make no sense. Standard preset. Yep. Okay. Now we want to send the MIDI there. So we already have one send. We add another. You see there are only maximum 4 sends. You can get around that by making another MIDI track and then send it there and then use those MIDI sends. But you can imagine that this gets kind of annoying, and you won't really be doing that. So it kind of makes no sense to even handle it like that. But one thing that I like about the MIDI sends is that you can just start typing in the name of the plugin, and then it will only show those. And then you see, okay, it's the one on the pad, so it must be that one. It would be even easier to identify the correct instance of a plugin if you could rename them, like in Bitwig. This is not a thing in Cubase, unfortunately. Anyway, let's get started. This a bit. Now, here I'm currently using the ARP in Synth 1 itself. Which is kind of nice, but I will turn it off now and instead use a MIDI effect. Just because I can, and because I want to try the MIDI effects in Cubase again, since I have not used them for a long time. There are basically 2 MIDI effects for arpeggios. One of them is Arpeggi 5 and the other one is Arpeggi SX. And well, Arpeggi 5 is kind of weird. Well, step size makes sense, like how long is each step, then length. Oh, I think step size is how long it takes until the next note's being generated, and then the length of each note. Okay. Then the key range, well, that also makes sense, like currently it's 1 octave, could be 2 octaves. But it's kind of weird because it started deep and then it went high and then it just stayed high forever. So this plugin kind of, I don't know, you can try to make sense of it, but it would be complicated. Up only. Let's see what this is like. For example, what I don't get about this is I have exactly 4 notes here, and in synth 1, for example, that leads to a sequence that always perfectly starts from beginning at the end of each bar, or like each quarter note even. And with Arpeggi, it kind of does not. And also when you are setting it to user, you can create your own crazy rhythms, and I can just tell you, I have no idea what this does, but it always creates some very unique patterns. So this is basically pretty much a randomizer or something. Arpeggi SX is easier to use. There you can, it's a little bit more like you would expect. For example, you can just choose something that is ascending, so it goes up, and then let it play. There are also sequences, but this part is a little bit more complicated. Okay, so when repeats are being set to 1, then you get more of these traditional patterns, and that's exactly what I was searching for. And I think I really like Triller from Outside 1x here. I have no idea what it actually does, but it sounds cool. Now I'm showing you something that you cannot do in Bitwig, but you can do it in Cubase. At least if I can remember how it's done. I think you have to go to MIDI and then like MIDI parameter facets. Yeah, I mean that must be it. Yes, and then it will render all the MIDI effects, and then you have the MIDI notes themselves. So it's kind of like a bounce, but specifically made for MIDI, so that you can, well, just work with the MIDI. For some reason, MIDI effects are always slightly inaccurate, so it does make sense to render them out, because then you can quantize them. Yeah. My movements are sometimes a little bit weird is because scrolling while holding down the modifier key for going left right goes into the opposite direction in Bitwig. So I'm always going into the wrong direction here. Anyway, I will return to this being a chord-based thingies with a MIDI effect, so that I can maybe try different chords later with the same arpeggiator. I just wanted to show you this because it can be very useful when you actually want to commit to some MIDI that you then, I don't know, bounce the MIDI to what it really is and then tweak it or something. Okay, now I want to sidechain this thing. And there I can show you a different example of why Cubase needs to step up its game. For example, here I have a compressor, a sidechain compressor, which is currently being sidechained from the kick. You can see the sidechain button is activated. That's already one of the problems with how Cubase handles it, because you always have to press on the activate sidechain button and then select the sidechain send as well. But in Bitwig you only have to select the input, like from which input the sidechain should come, and when nothing is selected then it's also automatically deactivated. So selecting the source and selecting if it's activated is done in the same step, while in Cubase it is two different steps. That's one of the problems. Now another problem, of course, that from here you cannot see from where it is coming, because as I said before, this DAW doesn't use receives but sends, which can be a little bit confusing. And then the next thing is, well, you can hold Alt and drag an effect to copy it like this, but you cannot hold Alt and drag it to a different track. Then it just asks you if you want to remove the effect, and I will take that it doesn't ask for that again and click on abort, because I don't want to remove the effect. What you actually want to do if you or what you have to do when you want to copy an effect is going into the mix console, enabling the mode where you can see the effects, and then you can copy the instances like that. That actually works, but the effect will not immediately do what you want it to do, because you now still have to set up the routing for this sidechain. That's also different than in Bitwig. In Bitwig, when a compressor already has receives a sidechain input from a certain source and you copy that effect, then it will still receive from that source. The sidechain source is being copied with the effect, which makes a lot of sense, because otherwise why would you copy that exact instance that handles the sidechaining? While in Cubase you still have to set it up again. So the developers, Steinberg, really didn't think that through a lot yet. And I hope that they are watching this video at some point and learn something from Bitwig by having me as a mediator or something. That would be pretty cool. So now I have to select the sidechain input of the ARP. At least that's pretty straightforward, because this list tells you all of the sidechain inputs that are currently possible. That's not too bad. Now ARP, let's go. Okay, I like that. Now let's go on actually, because I want to do something else. I want to work with audio, so I will import a drum break. Working with drum breaks is something that I always liked more in Bitwig, in Cubase than in Bitwig. So I hope that this video is going to showcase what's going on there. Okay, let's take this drum break. So now we have a drum break track here, and we have to select a loop from that. Okay, it seems to start from here. So yeah, you can enable the zero crossing thing, and then will only snap to places where there is a zero crossing, which enables you to always automatically find places where you don't even have to make a crossfade, which I find is a very cool feature and handy to have up here, so that you can always reach it. Then you can turn on snap and snap to some bar, like in this case the bar where it should all start. Then you see that this is the next bar, so you can zoom in there and again make a cut that fits perfectly, and then remove the rest of the file. Now you have actually made a perfect loop. While working with audio, trying to loop audio in Bitwig is always feels more like approximating the loop. At least I don't know where the workflow is to do it differently. By the way, one thing in Bitwig is you can only drag these things up here. At least I don't know where the hotkeys are, while in Cubase you can hold Alt to drag the right marker and hold Ctrl to drag the left marker, which is very useful when you have zoomed in so much that you don't see where the markers are. Then you can just do this, and then you know that again. While in Bitwig I always have to zoom out like crazy to change the markers, which in bigger problems gets quite annoying. So here I want to now select a different time stretch algorithm. I can do that up here, elastic. So we have the elastic time stretch algorithms, just like in Bitwig. And I can choose elastic tape, because that is basically resampling. And then I don't actually have to use elastic for that. I think there is there is no normal resampler among the standard time stretching methods of this DAW. Also, this DAW lacks some time stretching methods that just sound experimental. That's something that I like more about Bitwig. There you can use some seriously crappy time stretching algorithms that sound really cool, while here there is only time stretching algorithms that try to be serious, which is not always cool. So in this whole pseudo inspector view up here, I don't see any point where there is the BPM or the tempo of this audio track, but I can add musical mode, which is important because in musical mode I can change the speed of this thing. Now, one cool thing that you already see when I'm clicking on this is it still uses the same section of audio that I have cut here. While in Bitwig, you often get into this situation that when you are, I don't know, like working with the length of something or with the tempo of a track, then it will not have the same section anymore that you cut. It happens a lot and it's getting really annoying at some point. So yeah, that often keeps me from cutting or slicing samples. Here in Cubase, however, you can go to the pool and there you can finally change the tempo. You cannot drag on this, but at least you can type something in here, like 130. Can you type something like 130 divided by 2? No, you cannot, even though that would be useful. But Bitwig also lacks a feature like that. I don't know why all of these developers don't implement simple formula parsers into their DAW. would be a pretty cool feature. So what I'm always doing here is I'm zooming in more and more, trying to find an approximation to the BPM that I want to have here. Okay, so we are getting pretty close. Let's see, 8.5. Okay, no, so 8.6. Oh, I would have wished it to be 8.6 because of initial D reasons, but 8.7 is close enough. Now I have a nice break in here. Okay, now breaks are always a little bit inaccurate, at least these old school breaks. So one thing that I always like to do in Cubase, and I will, and I will tell you why I cannot do that in Bitwig soon is. So I just wanted to demonstrate you the workflow that I use when I just want to match a loop perfectly to the tempo. But now I will do that differently again, and instead deliberately choose a higher tempo so that I can set cuts to each drum and then align them differently. So now I will just zoom in everywhere, and because I have zero crossing enabled, I can just do that really quickly. Always find the perfect spots for the cuts. It's a workflow that is lacking in Bitwig as well. Here I can decide if I want to have more of the hi-hat or just the kick. Let's just take the kick or the snare or whatever that is here. So yeah, audio editing and stuff, that is just really OP in Cubase, and Bitwig should learn something from that. Can you see how that snaps to the correct part of the waveform? It's just such a nice workflow. Now the next thing that is nicer in Cubase than in Bitwig is that when you are overlapping audio events, then they are not gone. When you're dragging them back, then they are again there because they were never gone. That lets you overlap events without losing information. Like even the fact that you had a certain length on that track can be a useful information later, like when you try to change the speed or something. For example, now I see that there is a gap in here, and I could try to get away with that by selecting all these samples, go to the pool, and then again try a different speed, and I can just increase the speed until all the gaps are gone. Yeah, that looks good. Then I just have to check if it still sounds good tonally. Okay, now you see one of the things that might look like disadvantages at first, because Cubase has this feature that audio events can overlap in the arranger view. Now this thing overlaps this thing, which makes the rhythm sound weird. But remember that no information is lost here. This thing is just behind the other thing. So what you can do then, a little Cubase trick is, you cut this out and then you copy it in again, and then it will rearrange. Oh, actually it will not. That is weird, because I remembered this to always rearrange the samples in a sequence that is like chronologically. For some reason it doesn't do that here. Not sure why. Maybe it's a setting that has to be selected in the menu, or I don't know, because I definitely remember this being a thing. But yeah, you can also solve it like this, just dragging them shorter finally, because now that you know that you have found a good setting for them overall, you can finally drag them to fit exactly. Okay, now this loop is already pretty tight. Let's listen to it in solo. Now you might feel like that there is some clickiness, because sometimes there might be discontinuities at the end of each slice. It's kind of hard to say because, oh yeah, it's not hard to say because we have this feature here in Cubase where we can enhance the depth of every waveform to see better what's going on. So now you can finally see that there is definitely a discontinuity in here. Yeah, but it doesn't matter because it's really quiet. However, let's just imagine that it mattered. In that case, you could dial in a crossfade with this menu up here on all samples at the same time. And that's pretty cool. I like this feature a lot. Bitwig also has a nice feature for these kind of things. There you can just set crossfades from one sample to another automatically on the same track, while in Cubase you would have to add a new track for that, which is not such a nice workflow. But I also like this list type workflow up here in Cubase. It would be cool if both was available. Okay, so now I have really a solid break, and now I can select all these samples and take the tool for sticking stuff together and do that. And this is a little bit similar to the consolidate feature in Bitwig. Can make a double click, and then down here I will see the individual samples, and I can also you know, undo this process again. Where was it? Usually it's this thing. Why does it not work? Oh, now it works. See, so that is definitely a thing. But I stick them together again, and then I can better copy them around. Bitwig has this nice feature that you can just drag them out, and then it will reference the same loop at different places. Actually, Cubase had that as well, but it was long ago in Cubase VST 3.7, which is a really old DAW. Cubase VST 3.7. Let's look at it. It's such an old DAW, you can just see it from the way the interface looked, that that it's just really nostalgic at this point, and you wouldn't want to use it except for nostalgic reasons. But what it had going on, which was cool, was that it could reference MIDI events and audio events from other places of the project, which when I was a kid and I had a cracked version of this software because someone gave it to me, it was not my fault. So I had a cracked version of this software, but I must say, in my defense, this software was way too expensive when it came out, so no normal person could have afforded that anyway. So it's actually kind of good that there were cracks around, because otherwise there wouldn't be so many people hooked on Cubase right now. And I think Steinberg would even agree with that. So I had a cracked version of this DAW, and I was a child, and that's why I didn't understand what the referencing of audio events and MIDI events was good for, because I always changed notes and then it would change everywhere, and I was like, oh no, I lost my progress. I wish that was a copy. So at one point I started understanding what was going on there, but it took me very long. And I think Cubase, Steinberg, thought the same thing, and then they just decided to scrap the feature entirely. And I think it's a shame, because once you understand the difference between referencing an audio event and copying an audio event or MIDI, it is actually quite a genius feature, and they shouldn't have removed it. Bitwig added it because they understood that it's a cool feature. Okay, let's go on with this music. Okay, now I wanna make the break a little bit more exciting. Let's see what we can do about that. Okay, first of all, I wanna turn these two notes around. So I will cut them out and now replace their position. And because overlapping notes with other overlapping audio events with other audio events doesn't remove them, I could just do that without having to put somewhere extremely different. And now I can stick them together again, and it will just work. Maybe maybe I could get a little bit more creative about that. For example, duplicating this. So as you can see, that works as well. And but that just gave me an idea. I could, while I'm at it, just replace this part with this one. That would make much more sense. Yes. Okay, so that's a much better loop. Okay, I like that more. So we can remove all the other loops and instead use this one. At the end I want to make something a little bit different. Where is the ghost kick? Oh, there was no ghost kick, there were only ghost snares. Okay. Okay, then I guess I have to do it a different way. So I just, oops, I cut here, remove that part. Then I remove the consolidation of this kick drum and copy it. And just remove the volume of the second one. Maybe I do that with a snare as well, just because it would be cool. Now Bitwig has a better feature for that. There you can just click on an audio event, and then in the inspector there is a thing that you can drag, and then it will automatically add cool sounding repeats. While here you have to do that manually. But it's also cool to do that manually, I don't know. Because you can be a little bit more artistic with doing that manually. Like Bitwig has this thing that it always tries to make everything be automatic, which can actually get in your way when you're actually trying to finish music and not just make random ambient streams. Like doing something like this would take very long in Bitwig, because it's not what the thing does automatically, and you would have to do some things automatically and other things manually all the time. And that can get very confusing at some point. No, that was a little bit too much. Okay. So I'm holding all of these together again. Stick tool, click. Now they are consolidated. I remove all that. I zoom in. I make sure that this is a full bar. Okay, now it added a whole empty audio event over the non-empty stuff, but when I select both and consolidate this, then as you can see, it will create a loop with perfect loop points. So these are just the things that you have to know when using Cubase in order to have a good workflow. Some people would say that sucks, but I think it's an opportunity. Okay, nice. Now I wanna make this break sound a little bit more alien. So I type in frequency shifter, and yeah, Cubase doesn't have the best stock plugins. I have told that many times, and what it's, for example, lacking is a good frequency shifter. So let's just take kilohertz frequency shifter. It doesn't sound that interesting. Let's instead use, unfortunately I forgot the name of the frequency shifter that I tested recently. It had such a peculiar name that I cannot always recall it. Gotta be completely honest about that. But I can use, wait, what was the other frequency shifter that I could use here? M frequency shifter is cool too, I guess. Oh, it's typical Melder. You try to hold shift to sensitive drag, and what happens? It opens the enter new value text box, which is way too big. It has these annoying number things that here, as if you cannot type on your keyboard a number. Like, what is the intention of this? And why is it on shift? Whoever had the idea to put an enter value text box thingy on shift? What happens when I try this with CTRL? CTRL does nothing. Alt does even less, and shift opens the enter value thing. Like, I do respect Melder for making some of the craziest plugins ever, but Melder has the worst ideas when it comes to UI UX. He just messes with things that have been working for everyone, coming up with new solutions for things that already had a perfect solution, instead of concentrating on things that don't have a solution yet. It makes no sense. Actually, I want to try a different plugin, which is Freak. Okay, let's add Fuzzploid to it. That would be pretty cool, I think. Now, normally, if I was in Bitwig, I would now try to split Fuzzploid into multiple bands with a multiband container. Since there is no multiband container in Cubase, and it would be really hard to set up the multiband with groups, because you would have to make the filters and everything, I will just not do that. And this is already highlighting one of the big reasons why I always tell everyone that the DAW actually makes a difference. Like on Cubase, when someone asks which DAW should I get, then there are always these people that say something along the lines of every DAW does the same thing, it doesn't matter, just choose the one that you find like most appealing visually or so. But I wouldn't necessarily agree that this is true. If a DAW makes a certain workflow so annoying that you will just not use it, then you can very well just say this workflow doesn't exist. Another example for that is actually modulation. When you know Bitwig, then you know that Bitwig has an extensive modulation system. And what does Cubase have? Cubase has a MIDI effect, which is actually a synthesizer that synthesizes an LFO. So this thing currently synthesizes an LFO, but it's nowhere visualized. It just does it. You can select the speed and you can select the controller type. So now it sends to controller MIDI CC 24. But what does that even mean? Like, you have to now set up that some plugin either has MIDI learn on exactly MIDI CC 24. So if you have a plugin where you can set that up specifically, then that's nice, I guess. And if you don't have a plugin where you can set up MIDI CC directly, then now you would have to go into the studio settings and add a bus or anything like that. Then you have to add some sort of I don't know. I cannot even remember the whole steps. It was just terrible. Let's look for it. Cubase, LFO, auto LFO. Maybe I will find the video that I watched lately. Yeah, how to set up LFOs in Cubase with Greg Ondo. So basically what Greg Ondo explains in this video is
flows inside of Cubase. People use task
blah 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 blah. He right clicks on a plugin that does have MIDI learn.
The sound of the
blah 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 blah. He uses a cryptic looking plugin to select the same MIDI CC value.
The controller 16.
Blah 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 blah. He selects the LFO and then it can modulate this parameter.
16, and now it's going to
blah 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 blah. The modulation range is set in the modulator itself, and it or not depending on the parameter. So you can basically use this whole modulator only on one parameter, which makes absolutely no sense.
Say 16 now.
Blah 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 blah. You can also use MIDI CC values that are predefined by the MIDI standard, like gain and panning, if they are implemented by the plugin, which is rarely the case in real life. Blah 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 blah. If you have a plugin that doesn't have MIDI learn, or MIDI learn is just implemented in a different way, then you have to do the following thing. Do you have a plugin like this? No MIDI learn.
CC learn. Part of the operating system.
Some weird driver no one understands, a third-party driver that you have to install so that Cubase can do this. For some reason this is a stock plugin, but it doesn't have MIDI learn even though Retrolog has. Let's not question it, whatever. The LFO, it cannot directly modulate, so you have to go into Studio Setup.
If you have a previous version of Cubase, it'll be your device menu to device setup. And we're going to add a generic MIDI remote control. So we click on the plus sign here.
Yeah, MIDI
and
remote control.
And then what we want to do is say we're going to have MIDI continuous controller 10. And what we want to do is to assign this to the VST mixer, to, let's say, our glitch drums track.
Okay.
And under value action, we're going to scroll down to our inserts. We have our dual filter. And we're going to set this to position. And now
and then you still have to click on learn, because even though you already did all this, you still have to tell the DAW, oh, actually, I didn't do this for fun. I do want to apply the modulation.
Our MIDI input and output here is set to our IAC bus. So this will go back and we'll click on learn. And we can see now that the filter is responding to the LFO. So let's say I want to
now my favorite part of the video, so I have to turn down the speed.
Set this to maybe every 2 bars. So this is an easy way of being able to set up LFOs for plugins that don't respond.
An easy way. Actually, I'm feeling a little bit like Weaver Beats now, because he always declares himself the massive hater. But if he was such a massive hater as I am, then he would have already made a reaction video about this, because this is just the most hateable video that there is on the internet. I mean, okay, it's 4 years old, but they haven't changed the workflow in the whole time, so we could say that it's still applicable that you hate this video. And yeah, it's not even just 4 years ago that Bitwig has a cool modulation system. So Steinberg had a lot of time to react to this being terrible, which they didn't do. And maybe they will do that at some point. I do hope so. So yeah, let's not pretend like the auto LFO is useful for anything and remove this track again. Okay, I have a cool idea. I want to use Pro MB in expander mode to give this super distorted sound back its original dynamics. I have to use it with a sidechain input in order to do that. But if this was Bitwig now, I could just select the side as a sidechain input the start of this effect chain. This doesn't work here because the send channel of this effect chain is like post effects. So I will have to make a group, and this should not go into the folder with the bass. This was supposed to be the bass G. It renamed itself for some reason, because the fact that I renamed it didn't mean that I wanted to keep the name for apparently. So yeah, Cubase does have its peculiarities that are not very nice, and that they didn't work out for a long time for no reason that I can really justify. Anyway, now I put over all of these effects, and that means that I can now add a send effect from break to the sidechain. Yeah, and now I should be able to retain the dynamics. Oh wait, I still have to send the break to the new group. So this is break G. Oh shit, that's loud. Why is it loud? Because it is using no, I'm sending it over directly. It should take the same volume. Anyway, let's just put this to 0 instead and do the volume with the group. So as you can see, that works. Now I have it sidechained by the dry sound, and I can give it some cool dynamics from the dry sound, even though I'm distorting it hard. So this would be much easier to do in Bitwig. Like basically everything that has to do with routing is easier in Bitwig. But I'm still doing it in Cubase because it's somehow possible. If it's not too complicated routing, then it's still quite enjoyable in Cubase. And as you can see, you can use expanders much better on the dry signals, so it makes sense to sidechain that. Okay, I like that. So now you can really see how the break starts to make sense with the rest of the music. Before it just sounded really old school, and a lot of you might have felt like, huh? Does he have ear cancer for adding like an old school break to something that sounds pretty tight? But yeah, if you just process the break enough, it starts making sense. That's how I like to use breaks. And yeah, it works well to use breaks like that in Cubase, because I initially had an easy time slicing the samples and arranging them. It's also easier to process them in a reasonable way. While in Bitwig, I think Bitwig also already fails at the start, where you try to slice things correctly, and then you can only slice them like a little bit, and then it gets too annoying, so you don't do it correctly. And then you try to save it with good processing, but it is not really possible, and it's always very frustrating. That's why I don't like to do it in Bitwig, but I'd like to do it in Cubase. Let's put the sidechain compressor over to this place, and again remind ourselves what is better in Bitwig, because now we have to set the sidechain send again, even though we already did that before. Now break, sidechain input. Yeah, nice. Okay, I think I want to show one last thing before I'm sort of calling it a day for today. For that I will just, let's just stick everything together and consolidate the entire sequence now. Okay, everything is consolidated. Now I want to freeze some tracks, because I want to check how good these features actually are. So which tracks even have a freeze feature? Like this is just the MIDI of the motif, so it doesn't have a freeze feature, even though the MIDI is used somewhere else. Then what is this? This is an audio track. It has little bits of audio that are the main motif of the song, and I can freeze this, and it asks me just how many seconds after the last sound I wanna freeze, which is useful if you have reverbs and stuff. Even though I would say it would make more sense if Cubase automatically detected how long of a tail it needs to render to make it work with freeze. Okay, now this is frozen, so I cannot drag it around anymore. It looks like it can, but I can't. And there is a little lock symbol here to show me that this is not possible anymore. Also, some of the controls here are grayed out to show me that this won't work anymore. However, I can still change the volume of the track, so I can still mix the music. It's just that I cannot touch the effects anymore. So now, since I've frozen this track, I gained back some CPU. And now, as you can see, even though I froze this, it will not show as a new bounced audio file. The whole fact that this bounced the audio file happened in the background. And that has the big advantage that at every point I can unfreeze the track again. And this will ask me, do I want to defreeze the track? The files that were created during freezing will be deleted because of that. And now I can choose to delete the files or to keep the files and still unfreeze. I delete the files and now the thing is unfrozen again. Okay, now let me freeze it again. As you can see, the freezing process is pretty fast. It is actually not that bad. People always wonder about how bad it is and claim that it's annoying to wait for something to freeze. But if you imagine you're running out of CPU right now, and you just need to keep on mixing, or you even want to add even more elements to your music, then it's actually very vital that you can just hit freeze, wait a little bit, and then go on composing even more stuff. That's why I would say that Cubase is actually one of the best DAWs for people with bad computers. Well, it's not perfect. Let's try to freeze this track. This track doesn't have its MIDI on itself, but it comes from a different place. So can we actually freeze it? Now it asks us if we only want to freeze the instrument or also the channels, which means the effects. So let's choose both. And eingefrorene Instrumente, I don't know. Let's just press OK. So let's see if the bassline still works. And it does, yeah. And as you can see, it bounced the sidechaining from the kick into the frozen sound as well. Okay, the reverb didn't have so much sidechain pumping because it's a reverb. Now let's try to defreeze the kick. And now let's try to change the rhythm of the kick to something that makes no sense. Now, as you can hear, the frozen bass sound doesn't make sense anymore because the sidechain compression cannot react to the kick anymore. That is actually a little bit problematic here in Cubase when you're working with frozen material, because you always have to keep in mind, while the things are frozen, the sidechain stuff will not react correctly anymore. It will sound unexpected. However, the moment that you unfreeze everything and then defreeze and then refreeze everything, it will instantly sound correct again. So you can always live in in a peaceful feeling that you will always be able to go back to something that makes sense. Anyway, so I'm just saying that because that's a sensation that you don't get in Bitwig. In Bitwig there is no freeze, there is only bounce. And that's why it is hard in Bitwig to actually save CPU in a way where you don't lose information about your project. Yeah, here you can just do that. You can just hit freeze on everything. One of my favorite features of Cubase. And it will definitely sound the same as it should. And now I cannot touch any effect anymore because I've frozen everything. But I have the smallest CPU performance issues imaginable now, even though so many tracks are playing, which is cool. One thing that I don't like about the track freeze in Cubase is that it doesn't freeze the groups as well, so the groups still have to process. Yeah, that's one of the big issues here. And that's actually a thing that I think if Bitwig at some point decides to implement proper track freeze, then they should do it better than Cubase, because Bitwig has this superior routing workflow where you can make very complex parallel processing setups, which is like the equivalent to this grouping stuff in Cubase. So I think whenever you are freezing an instrument, it should definitely freeze all of the groups that also have something to do, like all of the crazy routing, wherever the sound goes on different tracks even, they should all be frozen in the same moment where you freeze the instrument itself, in order to really make sure that the whole chain is frozen, while here only what's on the initial effect chain is being frozen. and everything else is just still processing, and you cannot do anything against that because groups don't have a freeze button for some reason. They really should. It would make Cubase even better when it comes to its freeze features. And I think Cubase should just focus on that because it's already one of Cubase's strengths, and if Cubase was even better at handling freezing than it already is, then it would just be the king of freezing and freeze features. It is already pretty good at other types of freeze features, by the way. For example, if I used on an individual kick, I wanted to tweak an individual kick now, and I could do that with, where was this feature? Offline processing, yeah. So this is the list of offline effects, and if I had Cubase Pro now, I could even load VST plugins in here, but I don't. So I only have some of these basic offline effects. And one of them that is very, very useful for kicks, in my opinion, for example, is the envelope. This is a multi-segment envelope. Audio material is being changed. Should it make a new version? Yes, it should always make a new version. I want everything to be backwards compatible. So now I show you a really cool workflow. If you add this multi-segment envelope thing and afterwards you add a normalizer, first of all, your kick will always be normalized, whatever you are doing. And secondly, now you can try shaping the kick. For example, you can say, you see at the beginning it is like not very loud, so you can try to draw a curve that describes the opposite of that. And then at some point the waveform will start looking a bit more reasonable. However, the problem with this tool is it is much too small. It's really fiddly sometimes. They would have to improve this workflow a lot to make this really modern. Okay, can actually turn down the normalizer here. I found a setting that I found sounded very nice. Put the normalizer back to 0 so that the waveform looks nice, and instead turn down the volume on the track. And yeah, that's a nice workflow that you can have with offline effects in Cubase. In Bitwig, I find that the solution was way less future-proof. They just have a drop-down menu around up here where you have a handful of offline effects that you can use on an audio track, which is just not optimal, because here you could put as many effects as you want into a list like this, and so it is more future-proof, because I'm sure that Steinberg at some point will come up with even more cool offline effects. In my last video I demonstrated a cool thing that you could do with compressors, like compressing something in reverse. Yeah, you could do that with this tool. You could add a reverse module here somewhere, I don't know, umkehren it is, and then you could do the compression if this was now Cubase Pro, and then you could apply reverse again, and yeah, you could just have the exact workflow that I described in that video here in Cubase already, while in Bitwig you cannot. So all of the Bitwig fans that always think that Cubase workflows are just dated as fuck, you see there is a lot of sound design stuff in Cubase actually. However, you can see again that it would be cool if I was able to just use a reference to the first kick now, because then I could still be tweaking this envelope of the offline processor without having to replace all of the kicks afterwards. So we are back at something that is actually better in Bitwig. It's really frustrating knowing both of these worlds now, because I keep being unhappy about both DAWs. I just wish at least one of these DAWs and their developers would listen to me and just implement the coolest features of the other DAW, so that one of these DAWs becomes super ultimate in its workflows. It's not going to happen because I'm not the only user, obviously. But if at least sometimes some of my wishes were becoming true, I would feel much more inclined to actually pay the subscription of Bitwig. Unfortunately, the whole year that I paid the subscription, I think I didn't see a single time they implemented any feature that I told them about in the support form, which is a real shame, because I told them so many things and a lot of them were really easy to do. Oh, be careful. Well, like one of my favorite examples of things that I told them to do was implementing that when multiple tracks are selected and you cut both of them, then you cut one of them, then both of them are cut because you had both of them selected. I think that this should be like pretty standard in every DAW, but Bitwig doesn't have this feature, and I just don't understand why. Like, what is the point of not implementing a basic editing workflow feature for the arranger? I think they secretly believe that people should not use the arranger view. They just want to make a DAW where people can have fun with the grid and with the scene view, and when someone uses the arranger view, it's like, okay, you want to arrange music, you want to export a track at the end of your session, okay, you are really old school, but we allow it a little bit, but we will not work on the workflows for that. You should actually use a different approach for making music. You should be generative and stuff. No, I should not. I want to make music. I want to arrange music. I want to edit audio and MIDI. But I want to do it in Bitwig because Bitwig has better routing and a modulation system. I think that's not too much to ask, actually. I could imagine a DAW like Bitwig becoming a little bit better at editing features and then just be solidly and objectively better than Cubase. At the same time, I could imagine Cubase actually firing most of their managers and finally starting to realize that they have to work on some modern features like a modulation system and better routing workflows, and then suddenly Cubase would become the best DAW of all time. I think these are basically the two options of things that could happen that would be really cool. And that's enough of my little Cubase video.